I grew up in Glasgow not knowing that we had our own story of witchcraft, that 5 people were burned at the stake in 1677 for the bewitching of Sir George Maxwell of Pollok, and I'd never heard this story growing up. So, I was very interested in it, and I determined to write the play. I was fascinated by it, and I hope you are. So the first chapter I'd like to read is the opening chapter, called The Burning, 24th of February, 1677. Despite the occasion, a public execution, there was almost a celebratory air amongst the citizenry of Paisley. People poured from their houses, wrapped up warmly against the cold, greeting their friends and neighbours with outstretched hands. It had been one of the worst winters in memory. Snow had fallen relentlessly since the beginning of December. The roads, never great at the best of times, gouged and rutted as they were by cartwheels, had become treacherous with ice. No horse or human could keep his feet. The enforced hibernation had tested the patience of the townspeople. Elderly folk with no relatives to look after them, unable to venture out for food or fuel, had frozen to death in their homes. The week before had seen the beginning of a thaw as a watery sun emerged, causing melting snow to drip from thatches. 2 days of torrential rain followed, turning roads and fields into dirty grey slush, before the earth miraculously disposed of its unsightly traces and restored order once more. The morning of the 24th of February was crisp and clear. There even seemed to be a little warmth in the bright sun. People threw open their shutters to hear the town crier announce the event for which they'd all been waiting. 5 people were to be burned on Paisley Green for the bewitching of Sir George Maxwell of Pollok. The trial had gained some notoriety, and all were anxious to see the accused receive retribution. Some were convinced that the same witches had been responsible for the prolonged period of foul weather. The townspeople felt they would breathe more easily when the wretched individuals were reduced to ashes. They streamed towards the green, a heady excitement in the air, telling each other what they knew of the case. Those who had arisen early to ensure the best view were now growing weary of the wait and annoyed at those just arrived who pushed their way to the front. The restless murmurings amongst the crowd were suddenly silenced, replaced by macabre excitement as they watched the preparations for the executions. Sweating labourers arrived with vast quantities of faggots. Pitch was boiled up in readiness. 5 people took a lot of burning. 4 of them were already dead. The lifeless bodies of John Stewart, Margaret Jackson, Bessie Weir and Marjorie Craig were tied to their stakes. The ropes round their necks had mercifully taken their lives in return for their confession of witchcraft. The crowds watched with interest as the prisoners' corpses were smeared with hot tar to ensure hasty incineration. The pickpockets amongst the crowd welcoming this activity. They plied their trade swiftly, avoiding the watchful eyes of the militia, there to ensure crowd control. The trundling of a sledge being pulled over the cobbles from Paisley Prison signified the event they had all been impatiently awaiting. The woman on board was barefoot. Word had got round that Jenny Matthew Stewart, the 5th to be executed for the bewitching of Sir George Maxwell of Pollok, was going to her death still proclaiming her innocence. For that reason she would be denied the right to strangulation and would be burnt alive. Preparations must have taken place at the prison, for she was clothed in a light shift, her limbs already smeared with pitch. A tarred bonnet sat incongruously at a jaunty angle on top of her matted grey hair. As she drew abreast of the crowd, a hail of stones rained upon her from a group of catcalling youths, one rock striking her full in the face. It was a barely conscious figure who was helped down from the sledge. The Reverend Alexander Bell stepped forward and prayed quietly over her. The crowd jeered, angry at the idea of a witch being offered Christian consolation. But the minister's words seemed to restore Jenny Matthew. She held her head high as the executioner and his assistants hoisted her onto a tar barrel laid against the stake, to which she was then attached with iron bands. She gazed fearlessly at the crowd, many of whom shouted abuse. Words could not hurt her. Jenny had endured so much at the torturer's hand that death itself seemed a merciful release. She said a silent prayer, glanced sadly towards the lifeless body of her son John, who was tied to the next stake, and offered up both of their souls to God. The abbey clock struck 3, the signal for the fires to be lit. Sweetmeat sellers suddenly ceased plying their trade. From experience, they knew that no one had an appetite during this phase of the proceedings. As the flames took hold of each of the pyres, the smell of searing human flesh filled the nostrils, making gorges rise. The screams and struggles of Jenny Matthew as the flames from the tar barrel consumed her feet and ankles thrilled the crowd. The stone-throwing youths cheered as her shift caught fire, then disintegrated, exposing her naked flesh. As the lid of the barrel on which she was standing burned away, her body fell a few inches, but she was still visible through the flames, suspended by the iron chain binding her chest to the stake. As her charred remains roasted and sputtered in the intense heat, a cross-gust of wind blew amongst the spectators, who felt as if they were being suffocated by the nauseating stench. The sweetmeat sellers quickly covered their trays with muslin. A mother with a young baby pulled the blanket up and around the infant's face, hastily wiping a black mark from the child's cheek, as ash flew in all directions. The tall, well-dressed young woman standing at the back of the crowd had seen enough. She felt physically sick. Margaret Maxwell, daughter of Sir George Maxwell of Pollok, hurried away from Paisley Green, the anguished cries of Jenny Matthew still ringing in her ears. So that's the kind of opening chapter.